In recent times, some parts of Africa has been experiencing what many people describe as drought. When does low rainfall become a drought?
Well, there are different kind of thoughts or hypotheses with regard to when can drought be declared. Many researchers have dwelt with this issue for a very long time, and that has led to there is no universally acceptable single kind of definition for drought. But it's widely accepted that a drought is just a lack of water, a lack of sufficient rainfall without dealing with amounts, the levels, the thresholds on a basic understanding. That's what drought would be. But in the literature and in the research sphere, you find that drought has been defined differently. To meteorologists, drought would be, the average amount of rainfall that's received within a specified period of time that is below the average amount for that particular period. And particularly when it has been like that for a prolonged period of time, say more than 3 months and moving forward. But to an agriculturalist, then the definition changes. It is in terms of the rainfall that has been received or observed over an area, and it is not able to sustain, crop or agricultural production for the entire period of the growth of the crop. But to a hydrologist, then it would be, the amount of rainfall that translates into runoff and, say, groundwater, but then it lies below the amount that can sustain maybe sufficient water supply when it's abstracted from the underground. But yet again, we also have those who define it from the social and economic aspects, and they say that drought can be defined as a period of dry, say, weather conditions, which make that social and economic indicators become so dear and not able to sustain the well-being or the livelihoods of people. And in this case, you see life becoming expensive, the cost of commodities, goods becoming very expensive. And on a national level or an economy perspective, you find that the economy now suffers in terms of a lack of, say, food, sufficient food supplies, sufficient supply of water, and so on. And therefore, this affects generally the economy of a given region or country.
Okay, so it depends on where you find yourself that you'll be able to give a better definition of what drought is.
That's right.
So we do not have, considering these different type of drought, we do not have a specific length of time or number of days that we can, say that this is can be described as drought. For instance, if you plant and you're expected to have some rains within the next 2, 3, or 5 days, and you do not get rains within that period, can we describe that as drought? Maybe a week without rain, can that be described as a drought?
Well, no. Largely, we can make a distinction between what we call dry spells and drought per se.
Okay.
So drought generally is defined with regard to long or prolonged period of time without rainfall as defined. And this affects different sectors, as we mentioned them earlier. However, when the rains delay, perhaps maybe for the agriculture sector, where farmers expected the rains to come maybe in the last 1 week, and the rains did not come, and perhaps they had planted, then we can only say that we had or we experienced this number of dry days. And we can define the dry spell to be a dry spell of 5 days, 10 days. 30 days, and so on. And this is common, especially in the sub-Saharan Africa, where when we have like falls onset of the rain season, and after the rains have started, maybe 1 or 2 days, then there is a break of maybe several days. So we cannot call that drought, but rather it is more of what we call dry spells.
Dry spells.
Those can be defined, dry spells. They can be defined within the crop growth period or development period.
Okay. So thank you so much. I think this is a very good information for my readers. But we don't have maybe a specific. I just wanted to know. I mean, basically the number of days, so that people will get to understand better. So that when we are talking about dry spell, we know that within this number of days, that is what we call dry spell. But when it is more than that, then we can say we are in the drought season or something like that.
Okay. Perhaps I can give a more elaborate example. We know that farmers, for instance, depend on rainfall in much of Africa, rain-fed agriculture, and therefore their planting season depends on the start of the rains, and also a tradition of the rain, occur within the season. Therefore, we can attach this to the crop period. We have different types of varieties of crops that farmers grow. So, for instance, we know the maize crop, which is commonly grown in sub-Saharan Africa and much of the region. That it takes between say 45 days to 120, depending on the species. And we know a typical rain season lasts about 3 months. The actual number of rain days are not actually 3 months. So it could be something between maybe 30 to 40 days, depending on the area or the location. So with regard to when should we declare that this is a drought or a dry spell? Dry spells can occur within now the 3 months we are talking about, because remember, when farmers grow their crops, they have different growth periods or stages. We call them phenological stages.
Yes.
And within each phenological stage, you need a certain, say, amount of rainfall. Yeah. And therefore, we can define dry spells within that context. Germination stage, which takes about 5 or so days. That is when the farmers require the onset of the rains to be on and the rains to be present, to be observed. And therefore, within that particular stage, if the rains fail, for example, it only falls within the first 1 day or 2 days, this may affect that particular stage of the germination of the crops. And therefore, we can just declare that we had some dry spells or 2 days that were dry when we expected the rains to continue. The next stage may be that of the growth stage or the development stage, where the farmer may not require a lot of rainfall, but may require sustained, kind of rainfall that, falls within that period of time. And therefore, this would require maybe about more than 10 days of rain, up to about 15 days, where it doesn't have to be heavy, but it's present, and therefore it's helping in the growth of the particular crop that the farmer has planted. So within this period, if those number of rain days fall short of that, the development or the health of that crop may be interrupted. In other words, assume we expect maybe 10 days of rain and they only fall 5 days within the growth or development stage, then that may affect the end result, the maturity stage of the crop. When we move to the tasseling and maybe to the maturity stage of the crop, that moment the farmer does not require a lot of rainfall, maybe very little, because there is a lot of weeding, there's a lot of other, agro-economic activities that the farmer has to consider. But then at that particular time, you do not need a lot of rainfall, at that particular time, in case even that rainfall is not sufficiently there, then it means now the crops may even go into the withering stage, where they may start showing indication of, the leaves looking, frail or pale, and therefore the farmer may not expect very good harvest at the end of that particular season. So you can compare this maybe with the other period where the rainfall distribution, the rainfall occurrence occurs, smoothly. Then the farmer would expect to get a good maybe harvest at the end of it.
So dry spells can take between 1 and 3 months, or even 4.
Yes. But now beyond that, and we now bring in the issue of drought. So drought can be declared where dry spells have been very prolonged, and therefore there is no kind of hope that rains will happen. Because remember, the rain season is actually cyclical. It's periodic. So if it fails when it was expected, then you are going into the normally dry season. And therefore, if the rain season did not meet the threshold, therefore it would go into the next dry season, which is normally not a rain season. And therefore, that's when now drought starts being declared.
All right, thank you so much. So what is the cause of these dry spells? What actually causes the dry spells and then drought?
Well, Nurdin, that's a good question. I guess it all goes into climate variability because the rains, for instance, do not fall, in kind of a uniform or a homogeneous kind of pattern. So every season that we have the rains occurring, they are different. And this can clearly be seen if you take some historical observations from maybe a national meteorological and hydrological services anywhere in the world, and you plot that within an XY axis kind of graph. You will see that there is that fluctuation of when the rains were little, they were high, sometimes they were just zero. And in certain periods, you may see even where you can actually define this is where the droughts occurred, because the amounts were quite little and those high spikes are not there. And therefore, I would say climate variability is one of the reasons why we can talk about dry spells. But that would require now us interrogating the actual factors, such as the ones that drive, rainfall occurrence. For example, globally, we know there are those global drivers of rainfall. For example, like the El Nino Southern Oscillation, which actually is this global warming of water over the equatorial Pacific, as well as parts of the other oceans like the Indian Ocean and even the Atlantic and elsewhere. And those actually, when they behave in a certain way, for example, during the El Nino, the positive phase of the ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation, pattern, they go into causing anomalously high precipitation over certain parts of the country, including the East African region, for instance. And during the opposite, when we have, cooler than, normal sea surface temperatures over the equatorial Pacific, then we tend to experience drier conditions and likely drought conditions within the sub-Saharan African region. So those are global, but at the mesoscale or even the synoptic scale, we could also have other factors such as climate change with regard to fluctuation in temperatures, issues like cyclones, tropical cyclones occurrence within a particular region, the occurrence of depressions, and those are some just but some of the factors that could exacerbate the cause of dry spells or even drought per se. But on the smaller scale, we could also have human interference. For example, we have heard a lot about the issues to do with deforestation, issues of development of infrastructure, and so on. And those in a way may change the microclimate of a particular region. It may not be a very large area or region, and that may interfere with the patterns of the rainfall seasons or the cycle of the seasons, the weather in that particular area, and that may lead to a different behavior of the rainfall patterns, leading to the occurrence of dry spells and other extreme weather conditions.